great. Okay, if you go over to chapter 3 of the book of Daniel this morning, we're continuing into a new section. We left last week off at Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the interpretation, and now we're moving up to another one of those snapshot stories that make up these first section of the book of Daniel. So now that we have a working computer, is it working? Yeah. Okay, we're going to have an image up on the screen here. And I'm glad my wife took my son out so I don't get lectured about misquoting anything on art history here. But behind me, you'll see a very familiar picture. This is one of the most famous portraits of Henry VIII. Now, it was commissioned by Henry for the Palace of Whitehall, and it was painted by Hans Holbein the Younger, a German painter who would become Henry's artist for several years. And this painting is regarded as one of the most iconic representations of the king from that era, and it went on to influence how royalty was portrayed in art for years to come. And it was a favorite of Henry because he had replicas made and given to gifts of guests who, to suck up to him and show their loyalty, would hang it in their own houses. It was an opulent portrait, to say the least. Henry is posed without any of the standard royal accoutrements, such as he has no sword, no crown, or no scepter in his hand. And that was a very common feature of royal portraiture. But Holbein chose to convey royal majesty without these props. Here's what he did instead. He gave his majestic presence directed through Henry's aggressive posture. He is standing proudly, directed toward the viewer. His legs are spread apart and his arms held out to his side as if he's in a fighting stance. And in one hand he holds a glove while the other hand is reaching toward that dagger hanging at his waist. And Henry's clothes and surroundings are ornate, with the original painting being used. There was gold leaf used to highlight the opulence of his appearance. His features are exaggerated in a way to portray masculine strength and power. And the best part is, not a single part of this painting was true. This was a fiction created as a piece of propaganda. The truth is, at this point, Henry was aging. He had sustained an injury earlier that same year, and in addition to that, the health issues that would waste away at him for years had just now begun to ravage his body already. He was not a picture of strength and health. He was a picture of weakness, luxury, and laziness. But that was not the image that he wanted to portray. The image of Henry we're also familiar with was a carefully crafted lie. But it's the image he needed to project. Should anyone think that their king was indeed injured or weak or dying, then respect for him would end and his reign would be over. So with the help of Holbein, Henry created an image that fit his ideas and commanded the respect of those who served him. He made an image that was right in his own eyes. And this morning, as we come to Daniel chapter 3, we're met with another image that is designed to portray strength, power, and might. An image that is right in the eyes of the king, a king who demands godlike respect and wields absolute power. But it is all a lie. Today, we look at the image of man on full display, an image right in our own eyes. And we pick up in verse 1 with all the king's men. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, and magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. They stood before the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. The dedication of this statue is an event in this context similar to what we have seen recently in our modern Western history, like the coronation of King Charles or the inauguration of a new president. When these events occur, every dignitary is called in, and to be absent from this event is borderline a disgrace and an insult. And so this is a time when power is recognized and set apart, and a ruler acknowledged for their role in society. So Nebuchadnezzar, in his way of doing things, had called together all of his heads of state to declare to them his role of power, to show them who was really in charge. Because unlike our practices in the modern world, this is not a way for power to be bestowed on anyone. It is a chance for Nebuchadnezzar to declare power that he has taken to those around him. He is making a statement. By erecting this statue, he is, in a sense, trying to rewrite the future. So we just came from the account where this dream had been given to him, and that Nebuchadnezzar was spoken of as a head made of gold, and that's what represented him. But after him would come inferior kingdoms, until the God of Israel destroyed them all, and his kingdom filled the earth. Now, Nebuchadnezzar at first seemed to accept this dream for what it is, taking the interpretation as true. And as long as he ruled well as the head of gold, what came after him didn't really seem to matter. But chapter 3 has him playing a very different tune. It seems that he intends to make a statement to those under him, and a statement even to this God of Israel himself. Because it is not the statue that is being worshipped as a god here, but there is an inseparable association between Nebuchadnezzar's and his gods he worshipped. And it keeps enough distance to avoid blasphemy, but it's close enough to demand loyalty. To deny to worship, to give worship to this statue is to deny Nebuchadnezzar and his gods. So there's a picture here going on, and I want to just draw this out for a moment. At the end of chapter 2, when Daniel gave the interpretation, it says Nebuchadnezzar fell down and worshiped him. Now, this was not worship. We think of worship always in a religious sense. That's not what was going on. He was respecting Daniel. He was because he knew Daniel had received that interpretation from his God. So by giving that homage, that respect, that worship toward Daniel, he was acknowledging Daniel's God as a true God. Here, he is demanding others bow down to his image. He is not saying, worship me, but fall down in respect, worship this statue, and acknowledge my gods as true. You understand what's going on here? There's a contrast in this image going on here. So this statue is described as 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. And scholars suggest, because if you run that through, like if you were to plug that into an AI generator and try to get an image made, that would be a very funky looking statue. But so scholars suggest that to keep proper proportions, it was probably 40 to 35 feet tall, but it was up on a pedestal that could have been upwards of 50 feet tall. So this pedestal is raised above people, and the king is up there, or the statue that represents the king, whatever it really looked like, and it's looking down at the people, a declaration of his power. The king's lifted high above all who are around, reaching even to the heavens themselves. The message he is projecting here is very clear. In his dream, we were told God sets up kings. Here he's saying, no, kings set up gods. What's interesting, too, is this height of 90 feet. That's the same height of the Second Temple, which at the time when Daniel was really circulating, was being built. And you notice this repetition over again, how Nebuchadnezzar set it up. He set it up. He set up. It was really obnoxious when you read it, that repetition, but it's driving home a point. Because after we saw in chapter 2 the repetition of God setting up kings, here Nebuchadnezzar is setting up himself. This resembles another story earlier in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis. because in the land of Shinar, which some think is maybe the same place where this statue was erected, a different monument had begun, the Tower of Babel. And one writer draws this comparison. He says the Tower of Babel had a twofold function in the mind of the builders. It was a defiant attempt to make a name for the people who built it as a lasting legacy to their glory, and also to prevent the people from being scattered throughout the earth as God had decreed. Nebuchadnezzar's statue had the same two goals in mind. It was designed to establish a lasting testimony to his glory and to provide a unifying focus for the kingdom. This occasion was a public statement that the unity of Nebuchadnezzar's empire was rooted in the common worship of his image, a religious unity which he was willing to enforce with the threat of death if necessary. To ensure his place, he had to rewrite his future legacy. Nebuchadnezzar has brought his dream into the waking world, and he has summoned all of the king's men to come and witness it, as he defies God himself. And here's where it goes from there. It says in verse 4, a herald loudly proclaimed, people of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every other kind of music, you are to fall face down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. We're going to get more on the furnace next week, so we'll explain that part later. So we'll jump over that. So here we need to understand statues symbolize rule. That's something that has remained in the world to the modern age, though they had more significance then. We think of other monuments that line our land, that call us back to legacies. If you've ever stood at the Lincoln Memorial, or you've looked at the Washington Monument reaching to the sky, you've seen the high crown of the Statue of Liberty, the height and the immensity of the Empire State Building, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center when they still stood. Mankind loves their monuments. We love to build big and to reach into the sky and to triumph over the world and declare our power and our ingenuity and our work. Or another situation, you remember just over 20 years ago during the American invasion of Iraq, where the image we saw of all those people pulling down the statue that Saddam Hussein had erected of himself to declare his rule over the people. Ripping that metal statue. I remember watching it live on television. What Nebuchadnezzar was building was along that line, not so much like our monuments. It's more like the statues of Lenin that dominated the Soviet Union. It exists as a symbol of absolute power, a reminder of how man makes himself like God. That is the image of man. It's propaganda. It creates a narrative, a mystique about the person. It projects power and domination. Much like Henry VIII, Nebuchadnezzar was setting his image up. He did not like the image that God had for him, so he wanted to make his own. And the funny thing is, well, not so funny, we do the same thing today. We try to rewrite our future. We try to control God's plan for us. We make God after our own image. We make his ways fit our ideas. We change the narrative of his work in the world to suit our agendas, our quest for power and domination. Think about it this way. Why should they know we are Christians by our love for one another when we could just be known for what we're against? Why should Jesus be meek and lowly when we can make him brash and angry? Why should we look at the Jesus who reaches out to lepers when we like the one who crafts a whip and chases people out of the temple so much better? We try to make God in our own image, and there's two different extremes I want to bring out in this. We have one side, we have a group who twist and turn what the Bible says about humanity and what it is. They make our ability, our thoughts, our actions, our behaviors, our sexuality, everything relative and adjustable. We say that God evolves with us. He changes with the culture, and that and his word, therefore, is not certain. So we can change it if we like. An argument we heard 20 years ago from the Episcopal Church. Another example, and I'm not going to say who it was or where it was or any of that, was this politician. There was a video going around that was at a town hall event a number of years ago, and there was a debate going on about firearms. And she quipped back with something to the effect of, well, you know, if Jesus had an AR-15, he might not have been murdered by his government. As a Christian and a gun owner, that got under my skin bad. Because that's blasphemous. That's taking God on either extreme and trying to make him fit our image and our arguments. That's not the image of God. That is the image of man. That's what it looks like when we try to shape God into our image. When we try to rewrite God's ways of thinking into our ways of thinking. So how do we deal with this kind of thing? How do we remain faithful amid Babylon, even when all the king's men are going the opposite way? Well, let's look what's going on here, what's going on in the opposite direction, because even among the king's men, there are three who stand apart, three in this story who are not the king's men, but the kingdom's men. It says, some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. They're propping him up here. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And there's some Jews who you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you had set up. This world will try to shape you into their image, and they'll do it by force if necessary. It's the only way they know how. Pressure, force, and domination. And there's only one way to answer that kind of thing. There's only one way to remain faithful. And sometimes it's as simple as this. It's as simple as standing up when everyone's fallen down. Those around these three men noticed what was going on, because in that field, surrounded by this colossal statue up high on this platform, so high, an altar possibly in the front. Even so, there's a furnace over there, and it's ready to go. And that we'll talk more about the furnace again next week. And every single one of those men, seeing that furnace and seeing that statue, they fell down because they knew what was coming for them otherwise, except for three. Standing up and standing out. And much like Daniel's stand in chapter 1, they have chosen this place to take a literal stand, because they could not in good conscience bow to that statue and acknowledge Nebuchadnezzar's gods. They could not accept his power. To do that would be accepting him and refusing to submit to God's plan. It would be allowing themselves to be conformed to this world. And that was something they couldn't do. And friends, can I just say that even though we live in very cushioned, privileged Western culture, it's something we cannot do either. We're reminded again and again throughout the Bible that the world will try to shape you into its image. And it'll make it so easy. Because they don't like the things that are different. They don't like things that stick out. They like everything to be the same, everything to conform to their understanding. So the pressure will come on to be like them. And they'll use arguments such as, well, the lesser of two evils is the best outcome you could hope for. The ends justify the means. Think of how many more you could reach if you just compromise a little bit. And the pressure does come, and it comes hard, and it comes, like those examples, from all directions. There will be times when, if you are faithful to God, that you'll feel as if you're the only one standing in a sea of people bowing down. I think of Clive Jones, he has several friends who are priests over in the UK, and the pressure that they're under right now from a very hard, theologically liberal group pushing them to abandon orthodoxy. And there's one in his congregation, he's got a real problem because he's got a lot of very conservative people over here, and he's got the liberal people over here. He can't make any of them happy because he's just trying to be faithful and reach the lost. There's times when you will feel totally alone. These three Hebrew men are an archetype of the remnant. You remember in the book of Kings when Elijah, distraught after he saw so many from Israel, had turned away from the Lord and worshiped Baal. And he despaired, feeling as if he was the only one left. But then the Lord reminds him that he had a faithful remnant scattered who did not bow. Later in history, at the time Daniel was most widely circulated, there's this faithful few in the Hasmonean dynasty who stood against the invaders and would not break God's law and defile themselves. Then forward into the New Testament, you had in Jesus' day those who did not lose hope, but looked for the Messiah to come and break the bondage of Rome. Then you have Christians who stood against insurmountable opposition. We think of Stephen, who courageously stood up and declared the truth in the face of death. Of Paul and Peter, who spoke boldly before rulers and authorities for the gospel. We think of those in the churches of Asia who saw persecution coming around the corner. And John wrote to them and said, "Stand faithful against the powers of this world. Do not conform and do not bow down. And the one who endures will be saved." Throughout the history of the people of God, there have been those who would not bow down, and it's still the same today. Even when the whole world bows down, you're called to stand up. And they try to make it very easy to bow down. They give you 99%. You like 99% of what they say. It's just that 1%. Don't worry, it's just 1%. Or this is just the best option. It's the lesser of two evils. It's a step along the way. Don't bow. I like what Spurgeon said. He said, of the lesser evils, to choose none. These three men could have bowed, saying they're just showing loyalty to the king. They could have said, we're just trying to win favor. They could bend the rules of their faith and could be more so they could be more approachable. They could do this to gain influence and change the way the kingdom was run, but they didn't. They stood up and they stood out. It was noticed and it cost them. When you're faithful, it's not always free. And we live in privilege. And I don't mean that in a throwaway way people use it nowadays, but I mean we live in privilege as people, as believers in Jesus in the West. There's little cost for free expression of faith. It's not so in other places. In November every year, we remember the persecuted church and those whose faithfulness cost them their lives. But there's no guarantee it will always be easy. Sometimes you'll stick out. Sometimes you'll pay a cost, even if a small one. Sometimes it takes, here's a big thing, sometimes it makes more courage to not do something than to do something. They could have just went along with the crowd, but they did not do something. Humanity may have moved on from Babel when the languages were confused, but their hearts never left. Humanity is still fighting toward heaven, attempting to be like God. So, do not believe the lie. Do not believe that kings can make gods. Do not believe that humanity can circumvent God's purpose. Do not believe that you were created to be in the image of man. You were made for more. You were made to reflect God's image, even when that reflection is awful lonely. And next week we see just how this looks, how they reveal God and his ways to Nebuchadnezzar. But now here it comes where we need to think where we will fit, how we were made, what we were meant for. We were not meant to go the way of this world. God placed these three men in the place that they were, a place of high authority, a place of strong influence. And he called them to stand up and stand out from the crowd. Where has God called you? To reflect his image among those who want to bow. Well, he didn't tell you go hide that image in a closet. He didn't tell you leave it in the pew on Sunday. He didn't tell you, well, keep your Christianity, but don't let that influence how you are in the workplace. Don't let that influence your political discourse. Don't let that influence how you view others. Don't let that influence how you talk to others. He made you for so much more than that. And He calls you to stand up and stand out. And as we see, if you read the whole story, when you do that, you're never left alone. Amen? Please stand.